What if I told you the absolute greatest financial lie was systematically taught to you when you were a child, obediently dropping shiny copper pennies into a hollow ceramic pig, thinking you were slowly building a massive wealthy future today? Welcome to the hidden past, where rich people completely lied. Today, we are ripping open the massive illusion of savings and exposing exactly why global billionaires hold zero actual cash, while the traditional working class quietly bleeds their paper money to truly understand why the ultra-wealthy absolutely despise currency. We first have to look at the global education system, which is brilliantly designed to create highly obedient silent workers who completely trust the traditional banking establishment. With their lives, from the very first moment you earn a taxed paycheck, society aggressively demands that you put a large percentage away, locking it safely inside a highly secure and dark vault where it will supposedly magically grow into a comfortable retirement. But while you are quietly stacking your fragile paper dollars, hoping to eventually earn a completely pathetic 1% interest, the incredibly wealthy elite are playing an entirely different game, a ruthless game where holding physical cash is a liability. The fundamental hidden secret of the entire global financial matrix is that modern currency was never designed to hold value. It was strictly engineered to constantly circulate and rapidly depreciate, forcing the entire middle class to continuously work until death. We have to travel back to the historic year 1971, when the president officially severed the gold standard, breaking the crucial physical tie between printed dollars and metal, and turning global money into nothing more than shared illusion. Before that moment, governments were severely restricted in printing money because every single dollar had to be backed by gold. But once that golden tether was permanently cut by politicians, central banks were given the ultimate dangerous power without limits. When a highly successful billionaire liquidates a massive tangible asset, they absolutely do not simply deposit millions into standard accounts because they deeply and mathematically understand the terrifying macroeconomic reality of the invisible global tax that systematically destroys human wealth. That highly destructive and completely invisible force is called inflation. And it is the absolute most brilliant wealth extraction tool because it silently robs your purchasing power in dead night, without the government ever having to publicly raise income taxes when the central banking system decides to violently print trillions. They are essentially diluting the absolute value of your money. If you successfully save $100,000 in banks, and the macroeconomy experiences a standard 5% inflation, you are essentially silently bleeding $5,000 every year just for the absolute pathetic privilege of letting banks hold, within a single decade of supposed completely safe financial storage, half of your total physical purchasing power has completely evaporated. You still mathematically have the exact same comforting paper money, but it can physically only buy half the actual groceries. The wealthy deeply understand that cash is not permanent wealth. It is merely a highly volatile temporary measuring stick. Today, it is a rapidly melting block of digital ice shrinking, so they frantically get rid of it the exact moment, instead of aggressively hoarding depreciating paper. The wealthy buy assets. They buy massive commercial real estate and sprawling apartment buildings. They buy highly profitable technology businesses and massive agricultural farmlands. They essentially buy the physical, structural board of monopoly games because, while the massive central government can endlessly print dollars, they absolutely cannot ever simply print more beautiful oceanfront property. They cannot magically manufacture a highly successful global software company when the massive global fiat money supply is artificially expanded. The physical market price of those scarce tangible assets skyrockets, meaning the wealthy class becomes massively richer without lifting fingers, while the working class quietly watches their life savings burn. But the absolute most sinister part of the financial system is exactly what the massive commercial retail banks strictly do. Because they absolutely do not just respectfully lock your money, they immediately turn completely around and violently weaponize it daily when you humbly deposit your highly taxed paycheck into savings. The bank uses a brilliant mathematical system to legally multiply. They systematically take your physical cash and immediately lend it, charging them a highly lucrative and deeply profitable interest rate. The rich corporate investor casually borrows your rapidly depreciating savings and violently legally uses it to safely purchase apartment complexes, which generates massive and highly predictable monthly rental income checks from other working class people. Desperately trying to simply save, the wealthy investor completely uses the rental income to pay, keeping the highly valuable and constantly appreciating physical asset entirely, while the massive retail bank graciously hands you tiny fractions. And you foolishly and politely thank them for keeping money. The incredibly rich literally, unapologetically use the poorest savings available to completely heavily finance their own massive global corporate empires, meaning your highly obedient desire to safely save drives inequality. But it mathematically gets even more incredibly brilliant and terrifying, because the truly massive wealthy elite do not just buy, they intelligently use debt itself as a highly strategic mechanism, completely bypassing the massive federal tax systems designed for you. If you successfully work a highly stressful job earning millions, the central government will aggressively step in and violently take leaving you with severely diminished and highly restricted capital. Today, because traditionally earned income is the absolute most taxed money. But if you already entirely own a massive physical asset and you suddenly need $1 million in actual cash, you absolutely do not foolishly sell the asset. Triggering taxes, you simply confidently walk into the bank for portfolio loans. You cleanly use your massive appreciating real estate as collateral, and the bank happily hands you completely tax-free cash, because according to the highly manipulated global federal corporate codes, officially borrowed money is completely structurally untaxable and brilliantly legal. So the massive global billionaire lives an absolute stunning life, funding massive private jets and highly extravagant international vacations entirely, while their massive underlying physical assets continue to aggressively appreciate at a significantly higher percentage rate than the loan interest. The strategy is quietly known in elite wealth management circles. They mathematically brilliantly create absolute, completely free money from air, entirely bypassing the massive federal taxation system designed to crush, while the massive traditional working class is aggressively punished, constantly and heavily, ironically rewarded with a constantly, wildly depreciating currency. This is exactly fundamentally why highly successful billionaires hate cash, often having absolutely zero highly liquid cash. Lazily sitting around their massive publicized entire net worth is entirely securely tied, which they routinely and aggressively borrow against to fund lives they deeply historically understand that physical cash is toxic waste. And the absolute most physically dangerous thing is holding it. You must constantly and rapidly exchange it for actual utility, or something that reliably produces a completely unstoppable, predictable stream. The entire global middle class is tragically trapped in prisons, convinced that completely eliminating all personal structural debt is goal, because they fundamentally do not understand the critical massive differences, and how massive intelligent financial leverage is the absolute secret bad debt is foolishly borrowing highly expensive money for liabilities, like heavily financing a massive luxury car, or designer clothes, which aggressively and silently drains your absolute future cash flow, keeping you completely and entirely shackled to your corporate desk. Good debt is highly intelligently borrowing incredibly cheap institutional money, like taking a massive traditional mortgage to buy rental property where the local tenant completely and entirely pays the loan, and you absolutely confidently walk away with the physical property. The highly wealthy aggressively hoard incredibly good debt like gold, because they deeply mathematically understand that structural inflation destroys debt. If you bravely borrow $1 million today before inflation, that exact same borrowed $1 million is significantly mathematically easier. The absolute physical purchasing power of the fiat money decreases, meaning the massive and entirely invisible economic force pays loans while simultaneously completely aggressively increasing the total retail market value, creating an absolute flawless double compounding loop of unprecedented wealth. This entire massive global financial system is specifically engineered perfectly and massively financially exclusively reward the highly educated, fearless accumulators. The massive global government actively wants you to peacefully save, so the massive central banks can completely, continuously, deeply devalue. They aggressively, successfully sell you the completely romanticized fictional dream, because a highly uneducated society of obedient retail savers yields. They will absolutely never aggressively or intelligently challenge the structure, because they are completely terrified of losing the tiny numbers. But the exact brilliant moment you absolutely realize they fake and completely untethered from any actual physical reality or gold, you completely, absolutely understand why the ultra-wealthy categorically refuse. In the massive and completely pathetic global charade of banking, they actively, absolutely treat global fiat currency like hot potatoes, the absolute physical second it safely officially touches their hands. They aggressively and completely violently throw it into index funds, because mistakenly holding it for even a single second longer, the absolute biggest single financial risk you can possibly take is mistakenly foolishly believing that simply holding liquid cash saves, because you are completely systematically mathematically guaranteeing a negative return while the wealthy elite casually brilliantly use your financial fears.